Hello, and welcome to another episode of Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. What's the deal with biocentrism? Biocentrism is another atheistic idea. It was created in 2007 by an American scientist named Robert Lanza. And the idea is that the universe is created by conscious life and not the other way around. Um, in other words, our collective consciousness participates in a charade that we experience as physical reality and know of as space time. So the idea is all physical reality is just an illusion that our collective consciousnesses create as a byproduct of conscious life. And everybody is, I guess, engaged in this same charade or play of this illusion. But the truth is that the only thing that's real is consciousness, and physical reality is not real. Um, the reason for this idea of biocentrism is an attempt to explain certain physical phenomenon that suggests that consciousness plays a role in reality. So, for example, there is at the quantum mechanics level this idea that consciousness is necessary in order for the wave function to collapse into discrete particles. So you have the Heisenberg uncertainty principle saying that you really don't know where anything is at any given time or its velocity until you actually look at it and hit it with something. But that requires some conscious being to do that. So the suggestion is that consciousness is required for the collapse of the wave function, that is, for any reality, uh, physical reality to exist. A second idea of supporting biocentrism is the fine-tuned universe theory, that um, because it appears that everything about the physical state of the universe is tailor-made for life, then you could argue that conscious life is the reason that there even is a universe. So the fine-tuned universe theory says that many fundamental traits, forces, and physical constants, like the charge of the electron or the strength of gravity, make it appear as if everything is tailor-made for life. So biocentrism is saying, well, that's because life creates physical reality. That's why it appears to be tailor-made for physical reality, because life is what's creating it, this collective consciousness. Now, obviously, biocentrism is an atheistic theory because if all physical reality is an illusion, then so would God be. God would also be an illusion, part of our collective consciousness. So biocentrism would say God is fake. That's atheistic. Now, biocentrism has some serious flaws, and it's false. And I'll explain to you why. First of all, when you talk about the collapse of the wave function and the requirement that something conscious test it in order for the wave function to collapse. While that may be true, that's because there's nothing else that's going to test it besides a conscious life form. What else is going to test it? What scientists are people, and there aren't any other non-conscious scientists in the universe that we're aware of. So it's just a coincidence. The only people who are actually um, taking measurements at the quantum level happen to be conscious life forms. The other thing is that, well, yeah, consciousness is necessary for the collapse of the wave function in that sense, even though it's coincidental. But the field, the quantum field, still exists. That probability distribution is still a physical thing, part of physical reality, before the wave function collapses. So you don't need consciousness for that to exist. Um, Another issue with biocentrism is this idea of the fine-tuned universe theory. Well, the fine-tuned universe theory, I just did a video on that. How just recently it was discovered that, at least in the case of the fine structure constant, it appears that that changes depending on what direction in the universe you look. So, what we had previously considered absolute cosmological constants that can't change, and this is the basis of the fine-tuned theory, just recently it was discovered that one of those constants actually does change. And that opens up the possibility that the laws of physics can differ depending on what part of the universe you happen to be looking at. And that itself would require a change agent to change the laws of physics, which we call God. So fine-tuned universe theory is under serious attack and is not at all a certain theory. In addition, the fine-tuned universe theory suffers from what is called the anthropic principle. The anthropic, the anthropic principle states that we must find the right conditions for life in our universe, because if such life did not exist, we would not be here to find those conditions. So, just because there happens to be life in this universe, well, duh, because if life wasn't in this universe, there wouldn't be anybody here to talk about it. So, the fine-tuned universe theory also suffers from the anthropic principle. That is, the only universe we would be able to talk about is the one that was perfectly right for life to arise, because otherwise life wouldn't be there to talk about it. Seems obvious, right? Um, However, a more damaging flaw in this whole biocentrism theory is this: if we're all participating in this collective charade of an illusory physical reality, then why does that charade suggest that the universe is 13.8 billion years old? I mean, if time under biocentrism, um, time does not exist independently of the life that notices it. So, why is our collective consciousness telling us that time does exist independently of the life that notices it? That would seem to be a contradiction. So, why would our collective consciousnesses be telling us something that is apparently a lie under biocentrism? Why would it do that? Doesn't make any sense. Um, why would we be purposely fooling ourselves into thinking that time is a real thing and that it's 13.8 billion years old when under biocentrism, time isn't a real thing at all? It's just something that we carry around with ourselves to construct a physical reality that we can all participate in, but is really just our consciousness, our collective consciousnesses. And even worse, um, conscious life requires certain elements in order to exist. Our bodies are made of DNA, and that DNA requires certain elements in order for it to exist at all. And those elements are life molecules, DNA. Life requires these elements: carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. Without these five, conscious life doesn't exist. There's no way to make it without these things. Um, Now, in the early universe, the Big Bang occurred, the first expansion of the singularity occurred 13.8 billion years ago. But at that moment of the initial expansion of the singularity, these elements didn't exist. In fact, the first stars did not exist until about 400 million years after the Big Bang itself. And those stars did not consist of any of these life elements. They consisted of hydrogen, helium, and lithium. That was it. Those were all the elements that existed in the early universe. It wasn't until these first stars grew old and through time and nuclear fusion created heavier elements like carbon and oxygen, and then they exploded and spread that carbon and oxygen throughout the universe. It wasn't until that time that these elements even existed. So conscious life can't exist until after the first generation of earliest stars after the Big Bang lived and died and exploded. So we know from cosmology that life, conscious life, was not possible until at least 400 million years after the Big Bang. Uh, in fact, the earliest hypothetical possibility for life to exist by some scientists was about 17 million years after the Big Bang, whether you believe that or not. But the point is, it's still millions and millions of years after the initial expansion of the singularity. So conscious life itself could not exist for millions of years after the Big Bang. So the question is, well, why would our collective consciousnesses tell us that consciousness itself could not exist for millions of years until after the Big Bang? So under biocentrism, that would indicate that a collective consciousness were not even possible until millions of years after the Big Bang. So why would our collective consciousnesses tell us that collective consciousness itself was not possible for millions of years until after the Big Bang? Because that would be telling us that, well, if collective consciousness didn't exist for millions of years after the Big Bang, then there must have been something real um, that wasn't collective consciousness. So that's inherently contradictory. It's an inherently contradictory belief. How could you believe that physical reality isn't real and it's only the result of a collective consciousness, and yet also believe that for millions of years after the Big Bang, there was no such thing as collective consciousness, but nonetheless, there was a physical reality the millions of years after the Big Bang? That's a direct contradiction. So biocentrism is inherently contradictory. That proves it's false. It's incoherent and irrational. It's a false theory. It's a false atheistic theory. Don't fall for it. Somebody raises biocentrism to you, ask them, well, how come we all think that for billions of years after the Big Bang, there was no collective consciousness whatsoever? Why would we think that? Wouldn't biocentrism hide that from us or make us think something else? Of course it would, if it was true. Otherwise, it's lying to you. Why are you going to believe some collective consciousness that is lying to you? Why would you believe it's telling you the truth that it even exists to begin with? This is an inherently contradictory, self-defeating theory. It's nonsense. Okay, well, so much for biocentrism. It's not worth the paper it's written on. And Robert Lanza, uh, sorry, your theory is inherently contradictory, irrational, and incoherent. Um, so I hope you learned something. Uh, I do these videos mostly addressing these atheistic ideas and objections to show you that there's always problems with them. The best answer is God. God is real. Uh, but you may run across these things and other atheistic objections, and it's useful to have somebody explain to you what the problems are with them, so you don't believe them. Okay, if you have any questions or comments, please leave it below. I appreciate it, and take care.